for the last 2 years, and those asylum seekers or economic migrants who make it from Sudan.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company on a really dramatic day in world politics. Donald Trump has been dropping bombs on Caracas in Venezuela. He says that the president of that country, Nicolas Maduro, has been basically taken out of the country, him and his wife. We'll get the latest from Latin America in just a few minutes. Here at home, Reform UK have a bold new policy. They are going to be locking up people who are perpetrators of rape gangs for life. That's something that Zia Youssef has been talking about. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes with a senior lieutenant on Reform UK. We'll also talk about Labour smashed the gangs vow on illegal immigration, branded a disaster after small boat arrivals have hit a 3-year high. Also, manslaughter charges could be handed down to the owners of a Swiss ski resort nightclub after that deadly inferno that killed 40 people trapped inside. Still details coming out of that. The papers are full of the detail today as well. Also, another row between Reform and the government. The Chancellor is saying that the FTSE 100, the 100 largest companies by market capitalisation in the UK, that index is really high. And she says, oh, this is all marvellous, and she's taking credit for the economy. Well, actually, for people who are feeling it in their pockets, who are really, really worried about the cost of living crisis, you can't just be convinced that your life is better. What do you think about that? Because Keir Starmer's going to be out and about tomorrow. He's going to be talking this week as well about how life is so much better. Do you feel better under Keir Starmer in the last 18 months, or is this just yet another reset? We'll talk about the decline of Saturday jobs, meaning young people aren't ready for work as well, and 40,000 fit notes that have been handed out by GPs and health professionals every day over the past year. So much to discuss. We will make sure we do it not just with our guests, but with you as well. I can see the phones going already. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a voice note. Let's have lots of those coming through today. I'll play out as many of those as I can between now and 12:30. You can send them through on the main number. You can also send me through on the main number your WhatsApp text messages, and ring me on the main number, which is, of course, 0344 499 1000. So much to discuss. We're going to go straight to Latin America too to get the latest on this really, really crazy news that has come out in the last few hours. Stay with us here on Talk. Well, Donald Trump, the US president, says the US has carried out large-scale strikes against Venezuela and has captured its leader, President Nicolas Maduro, and his wife. He has written on Truth Social, the United States of America has successfully carried out a large-scale strike against Venezuela and its leader, President Nicolas Maduro, who has been, along with his wife, captured and flown out of the country. He says the operation was done in conjunction with US law enforcement. Details to follow. There will be a news conference at 11 o'clock. That's Mar-a-Lago time, sadly not our time. That is this afternoon at 4 o'clock our time. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. This comes after the number of explosions in Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, at least 7 of them early this morning. John Bonfiglio is a Latin American correspondent and joins me now. John, what on earth is going on here?
Wow, wow, wow. Such a rapidly shifting situation. This is absolutely unprecedented news. I mean, there was an expectation when we heard in the small hours Caracas time, around dawn UK time, that strikes were being undertaken across not just the capital in Venezuela, but across the country. There was an expectation that something like that would happen. The first we sort of knew that something else was potentially taking place was ongoing reports of not just aircraft and sort of missile strikes, but also the sound of helicopters right across the capital, which sort of didn't really sort of ring consistent to to the rest of the actions that were taking place across there in Caracas. And yeah, only in the last 20 minutes, so half an hour or so, have we been told, has there been a communique on Truth Social, of course, by Donald Trump, that the Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro and his wife have been taken and flown out of the country. This is absolutely unprecedented news, not just in terms of the strikes on sovereign territory with scant, questionable legal justification, but also the actual extraction of the president.
It seems sort of Back to the Future, John, as if we're going to, Noriega in 1979 or something like that. What's the background to all of this?
So the background is that, I mean, as regards a sort of a U.S. justification that Venezuela is involved in a sort of state illegal activity specifically relating to drugs, to the movement of drugs. Initially, it was cocaine and fentanyl that were being cited as the drugs of subject, and that these were being moved up to the USA, not just commercially, but also to deliberately destabilize the US. The United States, and that this was a sort of a state policy that then justified the use of the term narco-terrorism on Maduro and his administration, and the use of military force, not just as regards potential sort of war actions, but also as, and this is a pretty crucial point, as self-defense undertaken by the United States. Of course, legally, both legally and in terms of factual. If we look at the facts of the matter, the justifications actually have a scant sort of factual basis for what's been justified.
John, thank you for that. That's John Bonfiglio, Latin American correspondent. Really appreciate you bringing us up to date with all of that. It has just happened this morning. Maybe you're just waking up on a Saturday morning. We're in a situation where President Maduro of Venezuela has been captured by the United States. Donald Trump telling us that. Opposition sources saying the Maduro capture was negotiated, apparently. The previous winner of the Nobel Prize may be installed as the new leader. It'll be fascinating to see what happens there. It is very strange as well. And how do we in the UK react to this? Well, for more on this, Christine Jardine is with me, the Liberal Democrat MP from Edinburgh West. Christine, good morning.
Good morning, Peter. How are you? Oh, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Christine. My New Year's resolution is to let you get a word in edgeways in our interviews. I wonder if you could tell me your thoughts on this really quite striking and very surprising news. I mean, obviously the background is there and so on. What do you make of it in general, and how do you think the UK should react to it?
Well, I think we have to know more. First of all, it's stunning. I was shocked this morning when I heard it, because it's not anything that we would have expected in this country. I don't think, to see America going into a South American country and basically kidnapping their leader and taking them back to the United States. We have to look closely at this situation, see how it stands with international law. As the previous contributor was saying there, it's very difficult to see the justification in international law for going into Venezuela in this manner. They don't appear to be a threat to the United States. Yes, they have problems with the regime, and now say they're installing the previous, or we expect the previous leader, the Nobel Prize winner, to be installed. But it's a lot to take in, and it will be important to see how other South American countries like Colombia, Mexico, etc. react. I understand, as I say, it's still not entirely clear what's happening, but I understand the justification has been given is about drugs, but other South American countries are, more of what you would think drug-producing, drug-running countries. So it all seems this morning a bit unclear, completely shocking, and with Donald Trump, of course, we can never be exactly sure what he's up to, why, or follow the logic of his thinking. And this is an exact case in point of just exactly what the problems of having to deal with them on the international stage are.
And I mean, you raise some really interesting points there, Christine, in regard to, I don't want to. Obviously, every international situation is very different, but the key points of a president going into sovereign territory, attempting to remove a leader, and having a campaign which he will argue, of course, Donald Trump will argue, is totally justified, he's legally fine and all the rest of it, and he will argue on a legal basis that that is fine. But there are people already saying, well, hold on a second, he's against Putin. Didn't Putin do something kind of similar to this with Ukraine? There are parallels that will be drawn in all of this. I just wonder, from Keir Starmer's perspective, and given the very strained relationship of the US-UK relationship in many ways, how he negotiates this one, especially in relation to the coalition of the willing, which apparently is meeting on Tuesday to talk about Ukraine as well. How can you say, well, actually, the Americans are an honest broker in this when they're doing, not a hugely dissimilar thing?
I can't speak for Keir Starmer in this, but I think we do need to see it. Personally, I would like to see some sort of Cobra meeting, some sort of strategy from the UK and how we're going to deal with this. That meeting on Tuesday is going to be vital. And I think this is another example of Trump's erratic and unpredictable and unprecedented behaviour for an American president with regards to, foreign powers, almost. That we need to build back the relationships with our European neighbours, because it does underline just how unpredictable Trump is and how difficult it is to know exactly where we stand with him, where Europe stands with him, because he's made all sorts of comments about how he doesn't like what's happening in Europe, and horrendous comments about, cultural wipeout in this country, and he doesn't like the way the West is going. And you see him do this, and it does worry you what exactly his intent is. And I think the European leaders need to talk about this and need to stress to Donald Trump that this is not helping to stabilize the international system. If anything, it's destabilizing it, because America, for decades, since the Second World War, has been, if you like, the world's police force. They have, wherever possible, tried to maintain stability, and we've worked with them in that. Europe's worked with them in that. That's been NATO's role, obviously, in maintaining stability in Europe. But this just throws everything into doubt and makes it so much more difficult to know exactly how to deal with Trump, what he's going to say, and it's more bullying behaviour. He's bullying Venezuela, and regardless of what you think of the regime in Venezuela.
And just a breaking line in the last few minutes, Venezuela's vice president says the government doesn't know the whereabouts of Nicolas Maduro or Celia Flores, who is his wife. They're demanding proof of life for Nicolas Maduro, who appears to have been kidnapped or taken, however you want to term it, by the US administration. We'll bring you the latest on all of this, of course, right throughout the programme. Can I ask you about one domestic issue, Christine? This is a policy from Reform UK. It says that if you are a perpetrator of what the rape gang victims have done, you will be given a life sentence, tougher sentencing that they're promising. There is a feeling from many people that the last couple of governments just haven't, and previous governments as well, haven't done nearly enough on this. I know you've done a lot of work with about violence against women and girls. I just wonder whether you think this is a good policy by Reform UK. Is it something you think the Liberal Democrats should maybe adopt, or what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think we've only just seen recently the government unveil their violence against women and girls strategy, and I think we have to look closely at that. There's a lot in that to welcome. It has taken too long, and I don't think anyone would disagree with the fact that violence against women and girls is a huge issue in this country, which we have to deal with. But we have to prevent in the first case, and that's the thing about the government strategy, although, as I say, it's taken far too long. I would like to see it stronger. It's preventing. It's aiming to prevent violence against women and girls. And that, I think, is where we have to look. Now, you can argue that a life sentence would be a deterrent, and I'm sure it would, but we have serious problems, not just in this country, but internationally, with young men's and boys' behaviour towards girls being influenced by what they see on the internet and the social media. And
it's a huge issue, as you correctly say, Christine. Yeah. I just want.
And first through education, and that is how we need to deal with this. For me, it's not enough to say, we'll put people in jail for however long. We have to stop it. We have to prevent it, and we have to do that through education.
But in principle, are you against people who've perpetrated specifically rape gang crime being locked up for life?
Well, I think that is something that we would look at, whether or not it would be effective, whether or not it would deter people. But my strong feeling, as I say, is that it's far more important to stop it happening. Reacting after the fact doesn't help all those women who have been victims of rape. It doesn't help all those women who've been abused in a domestic situation, or all those young girls and young women who are afraid of the behaviour that they're seeing being influenced by social media. It's not enough to call for bigger sentences. Yes, what the government is doing with the rape gang specialist units and things is very important. Getting people into the police force who understand the issues, that's all hugely important. But what we have to do is tackle the problem at source and root it out. OK. Christine, thank you. Thanks for joining us this morning. Christine Jardine there, Liberal Democrat MP for Edinburgh West. What do you make of all of this? Not just Venezuela, of course, but the policy by Reform UK. We're going to be getting into that a little bit later on in the programme. Their policy on rape gangs, they say they want much tougher sentences. The sources told Sky News that Maduro's capture was a negotiated exit. Russia has said we reaffirm solidarity with the Venezuelan people as well, and we know that both President Maduro, Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela, and his wife Celia Adela Flores de Maduro, who have been flown out of Venezuela. That's certainly what the Americans are telling us. The Venezuelans are saying they need proof of life. The First Lady of Venezuela is not just his wife, she's also a member of the National Assembly of Venezuela as well. This is a major breaking international story that you are waking up to. We're going to have coverage right throughout the programme until 12:30, but we're going to talk about what's happening in this country as well, and all the issues that are being affected here. 0344 499 1000 is the number to get your voice on the air or to send me a voice note. Ashley is in London and has some thoughts on Venezuela. You're very welcome to the programme, Ashley. What would you like to say?
Morning, Peter. Look, it's all a bit bizarre, but what I would say is that from what your conversation with the Lib Dem MP is, it's not kind of unprecedented in the sense that European and American presidents have gone for regime changes in different ways, whether it be in Libya, whether it be in Iraq. If anything, I suppose the only positive you can take from it all is that it's been done in as peaceful and not so much death as it has.
Well, we don't know if there is a death
times.
toll, Ashley. Obviously, there have been 7 explosions in Venezuela. Trump says it was a brilliant operation, but it is interesting. You've got all these other countries now weighing in. Russia saying they've got solidarity with the people of Venezuela. I wonder, from your perspective, Ashley, I'm not sure we quite got an answer from Christine Jardine there. What do you think Starmer should do? He's caught in this one, this international quagmire, isn't he?
Well, he is, but I just think that it's sometimes you've got to hold your breath and consider it rather than be reactionary. And that is that, did we know about it? Didn't we know about it? Do we have to respond? Don't we have to respond? And how do we respond? And I think it's just a matter of them to meet up and discuss. I think that too many times we've been reactionary with making comments on things, which really we need to sit back and take it in. Decide, and
we're still getting the facts. We're still getting the facts. Exactly. I think it's a very good point. Yeah.
Exactly, and I think that, and I'm not justifying any way, and I'm not the biggest Trump fan, but what I would say is that if people like Russia and Iran and so on are coming out criticising and holding themselves in solidarity with these people, you have to ask questions about the quality of people that are saying that, and it's like a geopolitical issue here. This is probably more what it is than anything else, and it's making a statement. Now, whether he can justify it under international law, whether he cares about that or not, the question will come is if the president over there has left of his own accord, even Guy Fawkes saying you have got to go, and he's decided to take that. I think that the European countries need to sit back, look at it, decide what sort of response what needs to be said to the Americans once they've got the information in front of them. And I don't think, as mad as Trump can be, I don't think that he would. I'm not sure that he would withhold that information. The one thing about him that we've learned about him since he's come into politics, even before that, is that he'll tell people how it is, and he doesn't really care whether they like it or don't. So it's not like you're not necessarily going to get the information. You might not like it, and you might be having to think carefully about how you respond to him about it. But I just think that we should not overly react. I think we need to, we're not involved in it. We haven't been asked, I would understand, to be involved in it. So I think let's see what comes of it. Let's see what gets said, what information is provided, and then the government can make a response on that. There may be a valid reason, who knows?
Ashley, thank you so much for your call. That's Ashley in London there. You can get on the air as well, 0344 499 1000. Apologies if my eyes are darting about a bit. I'm just looking at all the other broadcasters, all the different screens and everything that is happening. Trump has said it was a brilliant operation. Chris says, morning Peter, let's wait and hear what Trump has to say. Well, we have that information. He has put that in the public domain, although of course there is a press conference later today, 4 o'clock our time from Mar-a-Lago. The Liberal Democrat spokesperson is anti-Trump anyway. Also, Farage is correct, lock child rapists up for life with no release, says Chris. Susan also says, Jardine never misses a chance to push for closer alignment with Europe. Anything that happens anywhere is a reason to go back to being a country that has no sovereignty. It's tedious, says Susan, who says, very good morning to you, Mark. I'm many things, Susan, but I'm not, I couldn't dream of being Mark Dolan. An easy mistake to make, Susan. And listen, thank you so much for your message. I do appreciate it. Keep them coming in, 87222 with the word talk in your text if you're texting, and of course voice notes and WhatsApp text messages and phone calls as well. Get your voice on the air, 0344 499 1000. We'll go through all the news with Zach Wagman in just a second, the Conservative councillor for Stanmore. I want your comments as well too, 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you so much for your company this morning. I'm here right through until 12:30 today, and tomorrow between 10 and 1 as well. Some top political guests coming your way on both those shows, and then with Drive all week between 4 and 7. I'm actually not here next weekend. Alex Phillips will be in the chair, but it's great to be here today and tomorrow here on Talk. There's so much to talk about, and Zach Wagman is with me, Conservative Councillor for Stanmore, just to go through the news. Zach, I don't know about you, but my phone on these breaking news alerts and all the information about what's happening in Venezuela has been really the story of the morning. It's just incredible what's happening. What's your reaction?
Well, firstly, good morning and happy New Year, Peter.
Happy New Year.
Good to see you. And as you say, this is the #1 story at the moment. I didn't think when all the news yesterday was on Iran that there'd be something to trump that, as it were. But this very much has.
Good choice of words there.
Well, what can I say? But if it is the case that Maduro has been captured by the Americans, which it looks like, or at least that's what Trump is saying, and we'll find out at his press conference later, this is seismic, really. Venezuela is one of the most significant rogue nations, as it were. And if Maduro were to be deposed and there were to be regime change in Venezuela, that could have huge and positive, profound effects on Venezuela and the wider region.
Yeah, definitely. And for Americans as well, I mean, should Keir Starmer just sort of wait until 4 o'clock when there's the press conference? Or, I mean, he may have to respond to something before then, or Yvette Cooper. It's an interesting one, isn't it? And it seems to me to be almost slightly Back to the Future-y about deposing these South American leaders like Noriega in 1979, for example. It's really kind of out there. I mean, we have the background. We know there was obviously an awful lot of beef between the two countries previously, but it's a strange thing.
It seems to have come quite out of the blue because, as you say, there's been a lot of these issues with the drug boats, with the oil tankers, and it was very clear that Donald Trump is not a fan of Maduro, but I don't think anyone quite saw this coming as quickly as it has. And therefore, I think one would hope that Keir Starmer has a bit more information than you and I do, although, knowing how he's blown up some of our alliances around the world, that might not be the case. But one would hope he's got the information, and one would hope if he's got his head switched on right, which you can't always count on, but one would hope that he is in conversation with the Americans and supporting their activity, because this is good news for Venezuela if there is to be regime change, and supporting whatever can be done to ensure that innocent people, civilians in Venezuela, are not in harm's way, and that they're getting food, drink, medicine that they need, because they've been starved of it for so long. And if the British can support that, that would be a really good thing.
Interesting that Russia have said that the US has committed an active armed aggression. They know all about that in Ukraine as well. But actually, just on that note, can you have the moral high ground if you're Donald Trump to say, don't go into a sovereign territory, bomb it to smithereens and try to depose the leader, when essentially Putin did the same thing? I'm just slightly playing devil's advocate here, saying, if he's involved in these negotiations, he's talked about how he brought peace to 8 separate countries, what he told us before Christmas there in Donald Trump's world there. And he paints himself as a dove, as someone who wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize, as someone who doesn't favour war, but here he is doing this.
Sometimes you have to take action like this in order to deliver peace, and Maduro is an illegitimate leader in Venezuela, and if he were to be deposed and there was to be a peaceful transition of power to the democratic victors of the most recent election that weren't allowed to take power and are now in refuge, and one of them won the Nobel Peace Prize ahead of Trump last year, I think that would deliver peace, potentially prosperity, and sort of stability to Venezuela. And we saw it with Trump with Iran, for example. Sometimes you have to take significant action that might be violent in order to deliver a longer lasting peace. And so people can say this or that about Trump, and we'll see what has actually happened in Venezuela. But if there were to be regime change, if Maduro were to be deposed, that would be a good thing for Venezuela and ultimately for the world.
We'll talk a bit more about Iran in a second. We'll also talk about Jeremy Bowen, the BBC's international editor. Compensation has been paid to an Israeli family after, without permission, he went into their bombed home after the 7th of October. We'll talk about the big story here in the UK as well, which is Reform UK. We're talking to them a bit later on in terms of their policy that those who are involved in rape gangs and perpetrate that horrendous crime should be locked up for life. What do you think about that? 0344 499 1000. Keep your calls, text, tweets and voice notes coming in. We're back with Zach in just a minute.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, lots more to discuss here on Talk, and I want to discuss it with you as well. 0344 499 1000. Let's talk to Zach Wagman now, the Conservative councillor for Stanmore, who joins me in the studio as my news reviewer this morning on the debate desk. I just wonder, Zach, what you make of this policy from Reform UK. Just take us through this, because this is Zia Youssef, who's their policy chief, who's talking about rape gangs. He's talking about that he believes that there should be stiffer sentences, and Reform UK would bring in a policy of this to send them to prison for life. Just talk us through the detail of this.
So this is the idea that anyone who is convicted of child rape will be jailed for life if Reform to win the next election. And it points out that the average sentence for rape of a child under the age of 13 has fallen in the last 15 to 20 years, and that some of the people involved in the grooming gangs have received sentences as low as 6 years. And I think you and I and most of the people watching the show would agree that 6 years is an unforgivably short punishment for people that have committed crimes of this atrocity. And the reality is these days, both under the Labour Party and what they've done in the last year or so, but going back further, that people have been let out from their sentences far earlier on than was ever the case before, whether that's for good behaviour or now it's because we need to clear up space in the prison system. And I think we've got to the point where fundamentally sentences for issues like this, which are the worst of the worst crimes, have got too short. And I think Reform have a point here. But I think actually the bigger issue, and this is really important, is that the people doing these sorts of things know that what they're doing is wrong. Particularly if you look at the gangs and so on, they're not stupid people. They know what they're doing is immoral and wrong. They know the punishment, and I don't think whether it's rape, life in prison or whatever it is a deterrent to these people, because they're clearly so sort of mentally askew, as it were, that they are doing these things, and the grooming gangs are more than just one-off cases.
Well, you're absolutely right, but at least it takes them off the streets as well. And I do think tougher sentences can work. They may not work necessarily as a deterrent, but certainly they can't be out there raping young girls. It's a really interesting policy. We're going to talk about it with our Reform representative Gawain Tyler, who'll be with us a little bit later on in the programme. Just some breaking news now, not actually about Venezuela, but about Switzerland and the fire that happened there. Police in Switzerland have identified the first 4 bodies of people who were killed in that fire at a bar at the Swiss ski resort on New Year's Eve. The bodies of 2 Swiss women, aged 21 and 16, and 2 Swiss men, aged 18 and 16, have been returned to their families. Of course, there are lots of ways in which this is very difficult to identify people. Unfortunately, the effects of fire mean dental records are sometimes needed. On the front page of many of the papers today is a photograph of a young woman believed to be 15 years old who has been at a couple of Southern England private schools. Her name's Charlotte Nidam, who's a former pupil at a Hertfordshire school. She worked as a babysitter in Switzerland. She is among the missing after the fire destroyed a ski bar on New Year's Eve. She hasn't been heard of since the fire, which left, I think the death toll at the moment is 47, and there's a lot to deal with there. Let's talk about Keir Starmer now. He wants to reset again. I lost track of the phases, Zach, I'll be brutally honest. I can't remember we're in phase 2 or phase 3, or maybe we were just phased by Keir Starmer. He's talking about how he wants to kind of convince people that actually the cost of living is not that big of an issue and everything's absolutely fine. What do you think?
This reminds me a lot of Joe Biden, because as he was coming up for re-election, then obviously he didn't stand in the end, but he was telling everyone that, listen to me, the cost of living is not that bad. Your
groceries might be much more expensive than they were a month ago, but look at this chart.
Exactly. The reality is, the only person that knows whether my cost of living has increased is me.
Yes.
Because everyone has a different set of phone contracts, supermarket bills, whatever it is that they pay for. And you can only tell if they're going down if the amount of money going out of your bank account each month is going down.
And people aren't fools. They aren't fools. And if they're told, for example, that they're getting, their energy bills are going down, well, they're not. Most energy bills are going up despite this £150 relief that some people are getting freezing train fares, for example. Well, train fares are still really, really expensive. So he's going to try and sell this stuff as, look at this is wonderful, and look at what we've done. And you know, for the last 18 months or so, we've done some good things, and maybe we should listen to him, but or perhaps we can be sceptical.
Well, we absolutely should be sceptical. And just to pick up on what you said there about train fares, this is a classic Labour government policy that affects so few people. Just 2% of journeys made in the UK are on national rail, and the people that tend to get those journeys are people commuting into London, journalists and TV presenters that will be reporting on Keir Starmer about this. It is ridiculous, but I think it points to a broader issue. If Keir Starmer believes that the cost of living is going down, he's foolish, he's got his head in the sand. Keir Starmer could stand up and be honest and level with people and say the cost of living is increasing despite what we're doing, maybe because of what we're doing, he wouldn't believe that, and try and explain why, and treat people as adults, and people can judge whether or not he's telling them the truth. And you might say, well, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt or not. But if he's going to go out there and say, well, we're keeping your train fares still high, but just not as high, your energy bills are still high, but maybe not quite as high as they might have been, that's not going to cut it.
I'm going to go on a mini rant now, just for about 45 seconds, about exactly what you're saying. I totally agree with you. The media in London is obsessed with trains. If you take public transport in this country, you're far more likely than not to be on a bus. And the vast majority of journeys done in this country are done by car. Yep. Not that you would know it from Ed Miliband and his policies, and Sadiq Khan and various others as well, including some Conservatives, I'm afraid, too. But the point is that we need to remember, as we always do on this station, because 82% of our viewers and listeners are outside London. We are the least London-centric of any. London's important, of course it is, it's the capital city, but we love hearing from people all over the country, all over the world actually, about their experiences, and that's why we're on the side of the motorist as well. Right, rant over, but I know you have some appreciation of that.
That's absolutely true. And while we're sitting in London now, I'm a councillor in Outer London. As you say, most people in the country are not in London, and they get around by bus, and if not by bus, they're going on foot or they're driving, or a combination of all those things. I'm getting a train today, I'm going outside of London later on. My train was expensive, but I'm doing it for pleasure and whatever. Most people don't get the train, and the national conversation that focuses on the trains is bizarre, and it's because the people that drive it are not, like you say, sensible journalists and presenters like yourselves and those on this channel. They're people from the mainstream media that get the train because they live in their home counties, and it's their only frame of life. But I'm fully with your rant. Most people don't get the train very often.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, as well, you wouldn't have the London-centric stuff. I find, people say, "Oh yes, in Stockwell this has happened," as if you're sitting in Aberdeen and you automatically know the Stockwell's in South London. I mean, it's nonsense. I wonder what you think about this row, another row actually, between Rachel Reeves and Zia Youssef, the policy chief of Reform UK. She's been branded delusional after taking credit for the FTSE 100 reaching a record high. I mean, the FTSE 100 reaching a record high is not a bad thing, but at the same time, what does it actually mean to most people? And there's been a very, very interesting Twitter battle between the two. Only a couple of tweets here. Let me see if I can just find it here. It doesn't seem to be in front of me, but certainly he has said, actually taking credit, Rachel Reeves, for the FTSE 100 being really high. Well, actually, that fundamentally misunderstands how it works and how so much of that wealth is actually outside the UK.
Yeah, well, the Labour Party has done nothing but damage businesses since it got into government, whether it's through increases to the minimum wage, national insurance contributions, the employment rights bill. The FTSE 100 might be rising, but as you say, that's because of technological developments, because of business developments elsewhere around the world. And for Rachel Reeves to take credit of it, just to take credit for this, just shows what we all know about her, that she has entirely lost control. She's asleep at the wheel. She's taking credit for something that they have no right to be taking credit for and were not involved with. And this is papering over the cracks because they know they've done so much damage to business. You could see it in Keir Starmer's New Year's statement, where he alluded to the fact that if you work in the public sector, you're a sort of better person doing more moral duties than someone in the private sector. And while that might be true,
where does he think the money comes from?
Exactly.
Jason in the Lake District has been in touch to say the only resetting we need is a new government who put the British people first. This current government are incapable of doing that, so we are not going anywhere but further decline in the next 3 years. At least children are getting fed at school, allowing their feckless parents to neglect their parenting duties, says Jason. Big debate, and I'm happy to have it if someone wants to give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Labour are always banging on about breakfast clubs. Okay, I don't want any kid to go to school not with a full tummy, but surely that's down to the parents and actually When did we become responsible for all of that? Just before you go, Zach, because we've got more breaking news from Venezuela, we're going to talk about that with Philip Ingram in just a second. But let's talk about Jeremy Bowen, who is, of course, the BBC's international editor. The BBC has now apologised after Jeremy Bowen filmed inside the home of an Israeli family who survived the 7th of October terror attack by Hamas terrorists. He filmed in there without their permission. Days after the Hamas terror attack in 2023, obviously 1,200 people killed, 251 taken hostage, many more injured, of course, as well. The BBC's international editor entered the home of a family who had fled, filmed without their knowledge or permission. The family criticised the broadcaster in using its camera as a weapon, as they said, and for committing yet another intrusion into our lives. The BBC has apologised and paid £28,000 in compensation.
I wish I could tell you that this was a surprise, or this sort of story was a surprise, Peter, but I think we both know it's not. And Jeremy Bowen has not given a single decent, balanced report on the war in Gaza since the 7th of October. And this is symptomatic of him and the BBC more widely, that they feel they can trample wherever they like, they can go wherever they like because they're the BBC. And maybe in 50 years ago, in times gone by, they did have that clout and that reputation. And they've done something completely unforgivable, beyond sort of journalistic standards. This is decent human being sort of empathy person to person, because the family, the extended family of the family living in this home that he went into didn't know whether they were alive, whether they were dead, where were they. And for them to then be watching on the BBC as Jeremy Bowen walked around their home that had been ransacked without knowing where these people were, I think it's disgraceful, and it points to the fact that the BBC has no idea what it's doing, and it's sort of reputation, while in certain circles in this country is still at the level it was years ago, has fallen dramatically everywhere else, and they can't get away with this stuff anymore.
We'll talk about that with Colonel Richard Kemp, the former head of the British Army, a little bit later on in the programme. For the meantime, Zach, thank you. That is Zach Wagman there, Conservative councillor for Stanmore, taking us through all the big stories of the day. More breaking news. A US senator has said that President Maduro of Venezuela will stand trial on criminal charges. He's posted on Twitter, the Republican Senator Mike Lee, saying that the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, he's basically their foreign secretary, telling him he anticipates no further action in Venezuela now Maduro is in US custody. He adds that Rubio said the military action was to protect and defend those executing the arrest warrant. So that is very, very interesting. There certainly seems to be the case that President Maduro of Venezuela has been arrested. This is really big stuff. We're going to get into all of this with Philip Ingram in just a second, and throughout the show I'll ask Colonel Richard Kemp about it too. Stay with us here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Bob in Cheltenham, who says reforms child rape sentencing policy is unnecessary and only headline grabbing without much substance. The sentencing guidelines for these offences are set out in the guidelines. The provision for long sentences is actually already in place. The most serious offences can attract a sentence of 16 years imprisonment, with the range extending to 19 years. The issue is the application of the guidelines by the court, says Bob, who says it's a great show so far. Thank you for that. Lots of people getting in touch about that, including Tristan, who sent me this voice note.
Peter, you probably won't play this, but Christine Jardine, I'm sorry, is an absolute disgrace. An absolute disgrace. She will not say what the problem is when it comes to women and girls. She kept saying about domestic. No. It's what we are importing. It's culture. It doesn't matter what about social media and all that rubbish. At the end of the day, we're importing cultures that are not compatible to ours. That's the problem. And until the people in government actually admit this and actually deal with it at source and stop the immigration, it's just going to continue. And it's going to get worse because you're importing more and more and more people.
Thank you, Tristan, for that. We're happy to play that. No issue with that, of course. We're happy to play that. Let's hear another one from Kelvin on grooming gangs.
Good morning, Peter. I think the policy that Reform are coming out with, locking up child rapists for life, is a really, really good idea, because when you look at what's happening now, criminals are getting rewarded, they're getting compensation and being released early with this bloody lot we've got. So we need somebody like Reform in who will dish out proper sentences to people. So yeah, get Reform in, bring it on, because all these other parties will just, like I said, they'll just give them compensation, won't they, and release them early.
Thank you for that, Kelvin. Lots of people reacting on Venezuela as well. We're going to speak to an expert in a second. Mick says after Venezuela, perhaps Trump could find the time and resources to come and arrest Starmer for crimes against the people, says Mick. We've also had a voice note on Venezuela from Graham.
Good morning, Peter. I've got a theory on Trump doing this in Venezuela. I think he's had a word with Putin. I know Putin has said, he's with Venezuela. But I reckon Putin have given him the nod. Yeah, you crack on with Venezuela, and I'll crack on with Ukraine. And I think these two are hand in glove together, I think. That's why he's all against Ukraine when he should be with them. And he can sort out his domestic stuff without any interference from Russia. Nice to talk to you, Peter. This is Graham in Wales. Happy New Year to you.
Graham, thank you. Happy New Year to you. I'd be surprised if that's the case, but it is one view, certainly. Let's get another from Philip Ingram, who is the former senior military intelligence officer. Philip, I can barely keep up with the breaking lines out of here. Maduro captured, his wife captured as well. We're being told that they're going to be put on trial in the US as well. This is a US senator saying in the last few minutes that there's no further action anticipated in Venezuela. Now Maduro is in US custody, and this is Mike Lee, a Republican senator, saying military action was to protect and defend those executing the arrest warrant. I don't know about you, Philip, but it seems a bit Back to the Future with kind of putting me in mind of Noriega and regime change in Latin America back in the day. What's your impression of the dramatic breaking news in the last few hours?
Very dramatic, and it's something that the US has got a history of in its backyard, but its history has been very checkered. It hasn't been as successful as this operation from a purely military perspective. The planning that's gone into this, being able to identify where Maduro and his family are going to be for the length of time it would take to then send a team in to capture him and exfiltrate him, is a masterpiece of military planning and military execution. However, the legal basis for which it's been done is something that I think we all wait with bated breath to see how the Americans justify that, because if you're going after any criminal, we have to remember there's no international criminal court warrant out against Maduro. The Americans don't recognize that anyway. There is one against Vladimir Putin. So should Vladimir Putin be worried that someone could send troops in just to go and arrest him?
Should Trump be worried? Because I don't want to be too conspiratorial about this. I don't want to conflate things, and I don't want to just make really rubbish comparisons. But at the end of the day, you've got a leader of a sovereign country going into another sovereign country, there's deposing the leader. I mean, that's or attempting to depose the leader, in which case Putin tried to do that with Ukraine. Now you've got Trump doing that with Venezuela. Yeah. People will make that comparison, Philip, won't they?
Oh, they will, and it sets a very dangerous precedence. And this is where the statements that come out of Donald Trump, the Senate and the US from a legal perspective are going to be fascinating to analyse. But what people don't realise about international law when it comes to this level is it's not a set of legal texts that are sat on a statute book somewhere underpinned by some form of constitution.
It's also a question of whether it's enforceable.
Correct. And this is where the ultimate body that enforces it, if it's appealed to the highest level, is the Security Council of the United Nations, of which there are 5 members who've got vetoes. And therefore, the United States, being one, can make sure that nothing would ever get through that would give a legal underpinning for Trump to be arrested or anything else. So, international law is not this black and white set of texts that can be applied in different ways. It's up to interpretation, and those that are most powerful can interpret it effectively whatever way they want to.
I am not going to be, I'm going to just tell the truth here, as I hope I always do, or try to anyway. I am not an expert in Latin American politics. I know that there was some background, certainly, for what had happened previously. We'd heard about the different issues they'd had, and the drug smuggling allegedly, and the drug infiltration to the United States and so on. Can you, in your expert view, just give us a bit of background to this? Where did this actually come from? It came as a surprise this morning, certainly, but it didn't come from absolutely nowhere. This has been building up for a while, hasn't it, Philip?
It's been building up for quite a while. There were elections in Venezuela last year, of which Maduro then dictated what the outcome was, and the individual that won the elections was kicked into exile. She left and went into hiding. Subsequently, she has won the Magnitsky Award for standing up to Maduro's oppressive regime in Venezuela, and won the Nobel Peace Prize for her standing up to it. So this is a long issue, with Maduro having taken what should be one of the richest countries in the world and turned it into one of the poorest countries. Richest because it's got the largest deposit of oil in it, compared to any country in the world. But Maduro has siphoned off all of the profits for that, for him and for his criminal network, his oligarchs, similar to Vladimir Putin. And he's thrown his towel into the ring with Putin, with Xi Jinping, with the other countries that are carrying out oppressive acts around the world, thinking that they will give him support. And indeed, we saw Xi Jinping's team visiting Venezuela only yesterday. They were in. We've seen Putin flying generals in and military support in, as the US build-up has been going on for about the last 2 months. As we've been anticipating something. But that 2 months is what it will have taken the US to identify exactly where Maduro is going to be, to identify that they can keep him there or know that he's going to be there, and they can launch an arrest operation very quietly and covertly, and get in and get him out without causing something that will cause the US troops to get fixed on the ground. It seems they've achieved that.
What should Starmer do?
This is interesting. But Starmer should question the legality behind it, and put his position on the front line as a member, representative of a country that is a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations, and let the Americans come back with the detail on that. He should support the fact that there has been someone who's been oppressing his people, helping to run criminal networks that have been destabilizing South America, that have been enabling the Chinese growth throughout the region, welcome, and someone who has stopped legitimate democratic elections in the country from having the legitimate president in charge of the country. He should recognize and commend that action. But again, he needs to balance it off between not endorsing something that could set a very dangerous precedent. I'll put it that way.
We're going to hear from President Donald Trump later on. 4 o'clock is the time in the UK that he'll be giving a press conference at Mar-a-Lago, his Florida resort. What do we expect him to say? What justification do you anticipate that he will be using, Philip?
Well, I think we're starting to see that justification coming out in the statements that have come out from the Republican senators. So it'll be a criminal justification. We've seen that in the way that he has declared the drug gangs as narco-terrorists to justify under international law striking the boats that have been carrying drugs across the Caribbean. And therefore, he will come out with something that puts Maduro as the head of a terror organization that has been specifically targeting the United States, and therefore this was an arrest operation under a U.S. arrest warrant to protect the United States specifically and people in the United States. That's how I think he's going to try and justify it. What the rest of the world is going to do to that will be very interesting. I think the majority of the world will just stick its head in the sand and go, okay, right, that sounds good enough to us. Crack on, mate.
Certainly. Interestingly, the Venezuelan opposition leader, you mentioned her there, of course, Maria Corina Machado. She says the Venezuelan opposition that she heads has plans and teams ready to take control on day one once Nicolas Maduro leaves power. Well, I think he's probably not in power at the moment if he's been arrested by the United States. It's hard to know who's in control of Venezuela, if anybody, at the moment. Are you surprised that she's reacted so quickly? Perhaps she knew this was going to happen.
No, I'm not surprised in the slightest. She won't have known the timings of this going to happen. She'll have known the Americans will have been planning something, because the Americans will have been sitting down with her and her team and you're planning the next steps, the next moves. So the Americans haven't extracted themselves completely from Venezuela. A lot of this sort of stuff is the remit of the CIA. It's what the CIA has done in South America for decades. But it seems as if they've got it right in this occasion. On many occasions beforehand, they've got it very badly wrong. So the next few days, we'll see how the stability comes in. I've seen there's been a very strong statement from the Venezuelan defense minister, who there were initial reports that he had been killed, but then there's been a video interview put out suggesting he hasn't been killed and he's standing up against Donald Trump. So there's going to be a period of instability. That needs to be calmed down very, very quickly indeed, so that Venezuela doesn't fall apart and we see some form of civil war creating an even bigger problem.
Philip, thank you for coming on to talk about this breaking news. Really appreciate it. Philip Ingram there, former senior military intelligence officer. Very interesting point from one texter in regard to Jeremy Bowen, the BBC's international editor. He's presumably on a plane to Caracas at the moment. The £28,000 that was given to this Israeli family after he, without permission, reported and went into their home after the 7th of October. Will the £28,000 of compensation be paid by Jeremy Bowen? I think not. What an utter disgrace yet again. Another person says, hopefully Trump takes the same action here and we are liberated from this ever-increasing communist regime. Thank you to Bruce. He says, in reality, is there even an argument against life imprisonment for child rape? It's a strong deterrent that will save young girls in the long run. Well, interesting, Bruce. I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with a word you've said, but interesting from Bob there from Cheltenham saying that actually a lot of the sentencing does exist. It's about implementation of it. Dev in Turkey says, great news so far in 2026. Iran and meltdown, Maduro arrested. Will the SAS be storming number 10 soon? Let's hope not. Lots to discuss here on Talk. Stay with us.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good morning. This is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Lots to discuss, including the developing situation in Venezuela, where the president has been deposed. He's been arrested, actually, by the Americans. Him and his wife have been brought to America, we think, as we speak. Donald Trump is going to be giving a press conference a bit later on today. Lots happening there. We'll also talk about Reform UK in just a second, because they have a new policy. This is in regard to rape, and specifically child rape, and those who have been involved with rape gangs, and increasing the sentences on all of that, vowing to jail for life grooming gang rapists. We'll talk to Gawain Tyler, who's a Reform UK board member, in just a second, and get your reaction to all of that as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We'll speak to the former head of the Army, Richard Kemp, about the BBC in just a few minutes' time as well. He will be reacting to the fact that the international editor Jeremy Bowen went into a home of a family that had been bombed and had been treated dreadfully by Hamas terrorists on the 7th of October. They've now been compensated and apologised to by the BBC, but Jeremy Bowen, the international editor, was the person who went in there. We'll talk about Labour smash the gangs vow on illegal immigrants, branded a disaster last night as small boat arrivals hit a 3-year high. Guess what? It's not working. The one in, one out scheme, not working. Lots to discuss on all of that. Let me know your thoughts. And also, if the economic news is good, who is to get the credit for all of that? Lots on Rachel Reeves taking the credit for the fact that the FTSE 100, which is all the 100 biggest companies in the UK, is going well. She says it's her brilliant policies from Labour. A lot of people say, actually, hold on a second, 75% of the wealth is not even in Britain anyway, so it's very little to do with you. In fact, it may well be in spite of her efforts. We'll talk about all of that too. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call to get your voice on the air. You can send me a voice note on that number as well. Plenty of those coming in, and we'll make sure that we play as many as we can between now and 12:30. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, send me a voice note, as I say, or send me a WhatsApp text message on 0344 499 1000. That's the number for calls too. Plenty to discuss between now and 12:30. Stay with us here on Talk. I'm here today, as I say, for the next hour and a half, but I'll be back tomorrow between 10 and 1, and then doing Drive all of this week between 4 and 7. And don't forget, Monday is a big day because Jeremy will be doing breakfast permanently, starting at 6 a.m. with the Jeremy Kyle Breakfast Show between 6 and 10 every day. And Julia is back from her holidays too. She'll be here between 10 and 1, off obviously for the Christmas break there. Let's talk about Reform UK now, because child rapists are to be jailed for life as part of a crackdown on rape gangs if Reform UK wins the next election. They have said it's shameful. There are currently no minimum sentences for child sexual abuse or exploitation in England and Wales. Judges are allowed to set their own sentences. Obviously, there are guidelines from those sentences, and we've already had Bob in Cheltenham, who's one of our regular texters, telling us that actually it's to do with the implementation of all of that. Some perpetrators are sent to prison for as little as 4.5 years. This is Zia Youssef, the head of policy at Reform, said people found guilty of raping those under 16 should receive a whole life order with no eligibility for parole. Let's speak to Gawain Tyler about this. He is a political strategist and Reform UK board member. Gawain, a whole life tariff for this crime, is that the right answer?
Yes, I think so. I really do. I think the country is fed up with the leniency being shown in many cases. And please note, this isn't just about grooming gangs. This is about all of those who attack children and assault children. Though it is about the grooming gangs and what we feel is at times unduly lenient sentences being passed. But it isn't just them.
Yes, you're absolutely right. There are more to this. They say, Mr. Youssef says, for too long, Conservative and Labour governments have failed to protect our children. A Reform government will introduce mandatory minimum life sentences for those who rape children. Well, as shameful as not already the law.
I don't think that's arguable. That both colours of government have failed women and children in this country. We have this, the government saying, how do we deal with this? We do have misogyny classes. Well, I'm sorry, it's much deeper than that and much broader than that. There has to be stick as well as carrot. So, okay, misogyny classes as a carrot, but I find that very odd. I mean, I would say chivalry classes might be a better thing. I was brought up never to hit a woman, and that seems to have gone. And I think that's a great shame.
Do you think longer, I mean, look, longer sentences mean people can't rape children. That is what they mean. But will they act as a deterrent necessarily? If people are going to do this, they're not right in the head anyway.
I think it's the sort of thing that this is a salutary lesson to people who think they can get away with the mass and industrial rape of our girls. If people start to get sent down, not for 4 years, but for the rest of their active life, then yes, I think people might start saying, you know what, we can't carry on like this in this country. If we get caught, we are going down a long, long, long time.
Tell us your thoughts on something we've been talking about the last couple of days, actually, on this station, about the Islamist killer. He killed 2 people, an 18-year-old and a 19-year-old murderer, went to prison, took a prison officer hostage, was put into isolation, and then won a legal battle, £7.5 grand into his hand. But the legal battle has cost taxpayers nearly £250,000. Would Reform UK change that so that couldn't happen necessarily? Because there's a lot of people very, very angry about that story.
It sounds outrageous. It really does. I have to admit that I do not know the specific details of the case and the legal arguments being made. But again, it's all part of a pattern that the people in this country feel that they are the fall guys for other people's misdemeanors. We seem to care far more about the perpetrators of horrific crimes in this country than we do about the people who are the victims of those crimes. And for the government to basically, for want of a better term, spat 250,000 up the wall on a case like this is just diabolical. I think the ordinary men and women of this country look at a case like that and just pull their hair out, wondering what on earth has come to our legal system that seems to treat violent aggressors with a better system than we do our own people. And it's mind-boggling.
I have a lot more to ask you in just a second, but just bear with me for a second, Gawain, because Venezuela's Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino has said the Venezuelan people have been the target of the most criminal aggression from the United States of America's government. He says the armed forces in Venezuela now deployed in full for an integral defence of the nation. Gawain, the nation is waking up, well, the world is waking up to this dramatic news about Venezuela. Could I ask you just for your quick reaction to it? I don't expect you to be an expert in it necessarily, but what do you think of what President Trump has done?
As hot takes go, no, it's not the Venezuelan people who are being attacked, it's the Venezuelan government. That's point one.
Yes.
Beyond that, as I say, I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert in geopolitics with the Caribbean, but it is notable that I think 80% of Venezuela's oil is sold to the Chinese, and I think that America is re-establishing what it sees as a sort of post-war Monroe Doctrine, where America is the country that controls international relations in the Americas. And that's something that's been American policy since the 1820s. So let's not be overly surprised that they've taken this measure. And the claims are about the narco state and funding terrorism, which is not that surprising if you look at see what you've happened with the use of Venezuela using its forces and using its, frankly, oil wealth, not to enrich its people, but to back left-wing guerrillas next door in Colombia and elsewhere. So whilst I don't know the specific details of what the final trigger was of this, I don't. The Americans are not attacking the Venezuelan people. The communist government of Maduro has been a leech on those people for far too long.
It's a very, very interesting point, and one that makes an awful lot of sense. Let's talk about another row between the policy chief of Reform UK, Zia Youssef, who's behind this policy about child rapists, but also has been replying to Rachel Reeves' very, very interesting tweet that he sent, because she said it's all marvellous that there is that the FTSE 100, the 100 biggest companies, that is rallying. It's over 10,000 points, and isn't this marvellous? And doesn't it show a vote of confidence in the UK economy? He says, hold on a second, Rachel, hold your horses here. 75% of that wealth isn't in the UK. And actually, a former City trader who's been in touch, B, says anyone who knows anything about finance would know that the FTSE 100 is comprised of overseas companies. It goes up when the value of the pound falls. I just wonder what you make of this, Roy. That's absolutely true. And if you look at the FTSE 250, which is a much more accurate representation of UK-based firms servicing the UK economy, rather than the blue chip, the FT 100, then you have a lower performance on average.
look, she's the government. She's going to take any credit for anything that happens, whether she's involved or not, because she desperately needs to. The government's not had much to crow about recently, and so therefore it's going to crow about this. That's why they got themselves into a mess about El Fatah. They desperately wanted something to say, didn't we do well? It's why West Streeting took credit for all the new ambulances, which was, I think, set off by the Tory government previously. So, of course, governments take credit for anything that goes right under their watch, and they also take blame the previous government that anything goes bad under their watch. That's what governments do. It's like trying to ask the scorpion not to sting the frog. I mean, it's what they do. But that doesn't mean people have to take it seriously. I wish that the 250 was doing as well as the 100. If that was the case, then yes, she could take credit. But let's be honest, you don't tax yourself to prosperity, and that's what she seems to be trying to do.
And you can't just convince people, as Keir Starmer will try to do this week. He's going to do a big interview tomorrow. We'll play a little bit of that out on the show tomorrow, where he says that things are getting better. Frozen real fares, he says, energy bills are coming down. But a lot of people...
Energy bills aren't coming down.
Well, I know he's going to say it. I'm not saying it's true. I'm simply saying he's saying it. But the point is, you can't convince people that life is getting better simply by saying, as I said earlier on to another guest, it's not, you know, your weekly shop may be factually more expensive, but look at this magical chart that tells you that the cost of living crisis is ending.
Yes, you may not be able to turn on your heating, but here's some statistics I can show you.
Yes.
I'm sure you can warm yourself over some hot statistics. It's absurd. No, but as I say, she and he are going to take credit for anything that might even look like positivity, whether it's theirs or not. Of course they are. That's what governments do, and it'd be silly to suggest that they weren't going to. However, that doesn't mean that reality isn't going to bite. People know that their energy bills are going up. They know that businesses are closing down. They know we're exporting jobs because of net zero. They know that their prices are going up. They know all these things. That's their real lived experience. And no amount of positive spin on the part of the government is going to change that.
It's 10 years since Brexit. What do you make of where we've come and what you were campaigning for back in the day? Gawain, a lot of people say the Brexit that was delivered wasn't the Brexit that should have been there. Is there more to do? We had Christine Jardine earlier on talking about how she wanted a greater links with Europe. How do you think Starmer will deal with that issue?
There's so much more to do. I suspect Keir Starmer will sell us out for a mess of pottage. He's also already given up the shipping grounds. The Erasmus scheme is going to cost more for less positivity for our own students going abroad. And the whole deal he's doing, it seems to me, it's driven by ideology. I know people might say that. I think my ideology is that the people of this country are best placed to decide what's good for them and to decide how they're governed. But I think the way that the last government and this government have singularly failed, firstly, to take advantage of the independence and freedoms that Brexit offered us, and secondly, to even sell the positivity. Our trading situation is a hell of a lot better than people suggest. And I'm fed up at the times. The media has made claims. A spurious study is cited in America, is cited as the only thing worth talking about, when it has been debunked time and again. And yet, time and again, we have people, the partisans of Europe, saying, this country is rubbish, it can't govern itself, it can't do things for itself, and by the way, Europe's wonderful. It's not. Look at the economy of Europe. Look at the way that society in Europe is falling apart in many countries. There are, of course, the odd standouts like Meloni in Italy, but she's now doing bilaterals with America, not even using the European system and the trading system. So the whole thing's breaking apart. And yet the partisans of the EU in this country, the rejoiners, the ones who've never forgiven the people of this country for striking out for independence and freedom, will ignore all that and nail us to the coffin of a economic supermass that's going down.
Gawain, thank you so much for your thoughts this morning. That's Gawain Tyler there, political strategist and Reform UK board member. What do you make of what he was saying there, particularly about these sentences and also about Brexit? It's the 10-year anniversary of the referendum. Do you think that Brexit had been properly delivered? What do you think of that? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Plenty to discuss and plenty of voice notes coming in as well. We'll play some of those. Keep them coming in. 0344 499 1000, as I say. And thanks for all your messages, particularly about Venezuela as well. Big breaking story today. Brian says, once again, Trump takes swift and decisive action. Venezuela is a threat to the US, and he has moved quickly to prevent Americans dying from Venezuelan drugs. If only we had a leader like him, our Prime Minister would just use words condemning them. Reeves would send them additional millions of pounds in aid, and Lamy would give them the Isle of Wight. Trump is a man who will look after America and the American people. If only we had a leader of that calibre here, in Brian's opinion. Julian in Coventry, quite a number of people talking about this tweet where Rachel Reeves said, look at me, I'm great steward of the economy because of the FTSE 100, the index of those shares being so good. Julian in Coventry says, regarding Reeves, if she is a great economist, she keeps telling us, then she should know about 80% of the FTSE 100's revenue is generated outside the UK. It's not a reflection on her. Again, she is either gaslighting us or showing her economic illiteracy. Maybe it's both, Julian. That's Julian in Coventry there. And Brian says Reeves has no right to take any credit for the FTSE 100. She will go down as the worst Chancellor in history. Brian, do you rate her below Kwasi Kwarteng? I do wonder. Susan says, regarding the FTSE 100, maybe international investors, Peter, have decided that things are so bad in the UK and that valuations have dropped so far and that things can only get better and are therefore buying at the bottom. That's a very interesting piece of analysis as well from Susan. Simon in Lancashire says, Reform UK's life sentences are a fantastic idea. We need to overhaul our justice system to switch the focus back to the victims. Sentencing should be the first step in redressing the impact on victims, and prison should be far more focused on punishment rather than rehabilitation. Well, plenty more to talk about, including what's happening in Iran. Loads in the media not covering this properly, I think. Lots of people contacting me saying you need to do it every day. These protests are continuing. We've got an absolute expert on this. This is Khazra Arabi, who's director of the IRGC Research United Against Nuclear Iran organisation. He will be with us in just a second to talk us through all of it. It's a complicated issue, but you're going to want to hear what he has to say. Is great analysis. And keep your calls, texts, tweets and voice notes coming in. 0344 499 1000. We'll go to break in a second, but just a line now from the Russian Foreign Ministry, which has responded to the US's strikes on Venezuela, calling it a matter of deep concern and condemnation. The pretext used to justify such actions are unfounded. Maybe take a look at yourself, lads, when it comes to Ukraine. Stay with us here on Talk.
Brand new for 2026. It's going to be the only way to start your day. It's the home of common sense. It's where the nation can come to speak about the day's news. It's the Jeremy Kyle Breakfast Show. You know who you are. You get up, you graft, you work hard. I'm here for you. We want to hear your side. Promise you one thing. It is where the nation can and will come to talk. The Jeremy Kyle Breakfast Show, weekdays from 6 a.m.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
So there's so much happening in Venezuela. There's so many big international stories at the start of this year, and we cannot forget Iran. So much of the media not covering this properly, in my view, and we know that there have been serious protests in Iran for all sorts of reasons. Some of it's to do with money and inflation, 52% that's there. Some of it is to do with the regime just being a horrible, nasty, dreadful bunch of people. Khazra Arabi is an expert in this. He's director of the IRGC Research United Against Nuclear Iran organisation. Khazra, it's good to talk to you. Happy New Year. Just tell me,
Happy New Year.
Tell me your impression of what is going on in Iran, why it's going on, and what we in the UK can do to help.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for covering the protests extensively, Peter. As you said, the coverage in the mainstream media has been extremely poor.
Why is that, Khazra? We'll get into the big issues in a minute, but why do you think that is? Oh, Khazra, are you there?
Yeah.
It's not a great line, Khazra. Sorry, go ahead.
Why have the mainstream media not been covering
why do you think that is? Because
Iran?
we had this bizarre spectacle of John Simpson, the pompous BBC World Affairs editor, who was saying, "Oh well, we don't have many reporters there, we can't get in, and it's difficult." And he's right. And look, he's done a lot of reporting, very brave reporting around the world. But it is a bit pompous to say that. And I can think of somewhere else where BBC journalists weren't allowed in. That's Gaza, and we've had that reported in great depth, and every jot and tittle of what Hamas have told us has been reported basically as fact by many parts of the BBC.
Absolutely. So basically, this is, I think, a symptom of a far left bias that pervades the mainstream media. Iran's regime is obviously hostile to the state of Israel, and unfortunately, the individuals that are across the mainstream media prefer to side with the Iranian regime because of its hostility towards the state of Israel than call it out for what it is.
Sorry, Khazra, I got to stop you there, because as you know, and as we all know, Israel's just always wrong about everything, and that is the view of so many in our country and so many in positions of power. I'm sarcastic, of course. Khazra, tell us what's happening in Iran, why it's happening in your view.
This isn't a flash in the pan moment. Look, these protests are a continuation of a new trend.
We're just struggling with the line there, Khazra. We'll try and get you back on a better line. That is Khazra Arabi there. He's got some problems with his video. We can't do video, unfortunately, but we'll see if we can get him back on in just a second. In the meantime, I want to talk to Grace in Ealing, who's given me a ring from West London. Grace, you're very welcome to the programme, and I think you want to react, as many people do actually, to what Reform UK is saying here about child rapists jailed for life as part of a crackdown on rape gangs if Reform UK wins the next election. What do you think of this, Grace?
Various things. I mean, I'd be interested to know, for instance, where they're going to get the money from to keep people banged up for longer, because I think in theory it'd be great to lock up lots of dangerous people, but one of the main reason that people aren't locked up for as long as we might like is that it's a huge cost to the taxpayer and prisons are overstretched. So how Reform are going to manage this practically would be interesting. I would start off by castrating people rather than extending prison sentences. But I was particularly perturbed by an earlier voice note that said essentially that domestic abuse isn't the problem at all. The whole problem is people coming from other cultures, according to a voice note that
I don't think that's quite what was said, but certainly it's certainly not. This is not a domestic abuse problem. There is certainly Pakistani grooming gangs are a major problem in our society, and they haven't been dealt with properly. That is a fact.
Well, I'm not denying that they are a huge problem, but I think it seemed like the voice note was suggesting that because he hears more often about rape gangs, they must be the bigger problem. But in fact, 2 out of 5 rapes happen from a partner or ex-partner. 6 out of 7 rapes are carried out by people known to the victim. And we just don't hear about those things as often.
You're absolutely right. We're hearing about it now, and it's right that we do. And, we can agree that it's all wrong and it should all be tackled.
Yeah, I think we have a kind of an instinct to want to think, these people over there are far worse and we're far superior people. And we are privileged to live in a culture that has been impacted by Jesus saying that we should treat others how we want to be treated, and he treated women with more respect than was normal for the time. So we have had that influence our culture, and we're very fortunate that we're living in that culture. But that doesn't mean that there are no problems with plenty of individuals within our culture.
You're absolutely right. Grace, I'm going to go back to Kazra Arabi in a second, but we've actually got a message about you. Someone has texted in and says, can you please ask Grace what she does for a living? She's very intelligent. She should be on your show with you.
I am not very intelligent, but thank you. I am desperately job seeking. I keep applying for jobs and being rejected, and I feel very, very frustrated with myself. I'm so unsuccessful.
Any employer would be lucky to have you. I don't agree with you on everything, Grace, but you're certainly intelligent, and never say that you're not, because you absolutely are. That is Grace Annealing there, who has given me a ring at 03444991000. Thank you for that. Kazra Arabi is back on the line. He's the director of the IRGC Research United Against Nuclear Iran movement. Kazra, you were just telling us why these attacks are, why these protests, I should say, why these protests are happening and what is behind them.
So it's not thanks, Peter, it's not a flash in the pan moment. These protests are a continuation of a new trend of unrest that began in Iran in 2017, again in 2019, and again in 2022-2023. This protest movement is explicitly anti-regime. It seeks the downfall of the Islamic Republic. What we're seeing today is being caused by deep-rooted structural issues. The economic grievance was the catalyst, was the spark, but there are some deep-rooted structural issues here: political repression, an Islamist totalitarian state that has sought to control every aspect of people's lives for the past 46 years. People are simply fed up. They want the Islamic Republic, they want this Islamist regime gone, and that's why they are on the streets. Even if this protest, this cycle is suppressed, we can expect the protest to take place again later on in the year. There's no doubt about that.
Really interesting to hear that. We do also hear that there are people who are bazaar owners, shopkeepers essentially, and students as well. So this is perhaps a bit different. I just wonder what the longer term implications are going to be. And we've heard the reformist-ish president of Iran saying that he wants to listen to the protesters. Do you think that's sincere in any way?
The whole reformist hardliner nonsense is a false dichotomy that's been put forward by the regime, really now to just fool the outside world, because the Iranians do not believe it. For 30 years, they have seen the Islamic Republic cannot be reformed. The supreme leader has personalized power across every aspect of the regime. He has installed his cult of personality. He is the individual that is ruling Iran's regime with the totalitarian ideological armed force of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It's the most violent Islamist extremist anti-Semitic armed group in the world today. The primary backer of Hamas, Hezbollah, and all the other proxies in the world, all these terrorist groups. So in terms of change, they are unable to change themselves. For the past 30 years, that's been proven. How is this going to end up? Well, you have a situation where there will be protests and there will be suppression. The Islamic Republic only has suppression as a tool to preserve its power. So I thought President Trump's statement was very important. It was exactly the right message to send to the Ayatollah, because each time we have seen, whenever Iranians have taken to the streets, the Ayatollah and his IRGC have brutally and violently suppressed them in the worst ways. In 2019, 1,500 civilians, unarmed civilians, were massacred in just 3 days. In 2022, they had a systematic campaign of blinding Iranian protesters on the streets. This is a very ideological extremist regime. So President Trump is absolutely right to warn the Ayatollah. If you resort to violence, as you always have, there will be consequences. Okay. And I think, hopefully, that will make the Ayatollah think twice.
Kazra, thank you. That's Kazra Arabi there, who is director of the IRGC Research United Against Nuclear Iran organisation. Kazra Arabi there. Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, has been on Twitter and says the American actions in Venezuela overnight are unorthodox and contrary to international law. But if they make China and Russia think twice, it may be a good thing. I hope the Venezuelan people can now turn a new leaf without Maduro. Very, very interesting thoughts from him there, Nigel Farage. The actions by Donald Trump, unorthodox and contrary to international law, as he puts it. fascinating. The things are happening all the time. Maduro has been captured. His wife and he have been flown out of Venezuela. We presume they're on their way to America because we've been told that they are going to stand trial, or certainly Nicolas Maduro will stand trial there. Very, very interesting developments. The tectonic plates of the world are shifting ever so slightly in Iran, and certainly quite a lot in Venezuela. Lots of people getting in touch about all sorts of issues as well, not least this issue of what Reform UK are saying about jailing for life grooming gang rapists and others as well. Anybody who commits child rape. Penny says, why isn't Hugh Edwards in prison? The vile piece of work he was sending him those pictures. They're out, but people with hurty words imprisoned. All child rapists should be put inside for life, says Penny in Essex. Hugh Edwards, of course, not a child rapist, but a paedophile nonetheless, because he had those images on his phone of young people, children. Leslie says, those who have served time for grooming those girls are let back out into the communities where the girls still live. Reform are right. And Leslie, you're right too. It's interesting actually thinking about this, because I did a very, very interesting interview on Drive just before Christmas there with someone who works in an organisation to do with care and young women, children, girls who are in care. And he said they've just got to be absolutely vigilant about not necessarily people who are in rape gangs, but they're family members who try to get jobs, often jobs that aren't particularly popular, jobs that are easy-ish to get, working in that particular part of the care sector. Working in a children's home is a very difficult thing, of course, and many brilliant people do it, but there are those who try to abuse the system and get them back into rape gangs. And it was just a really telling and horrendous interview. I'll never forget it. Lee in Market Harbour says that silly Liberal Democrat MP, Christine Jardine, earlier on all over ilk are the problem. They think all boys and men are sex pests. That is boys and men from this country. It's okay blaming it all on Andrew Tate et al., but they never mention people who come in from cultures who treat young women and girls as trash. They just don't mention them. They can't mention them. Great show, says Lee in Market Harbour. I must say I don't think Christine Jardine is silly, but I do disagree with her on many, many things. Graham says if this was Starmer dealing with Venezuela, he would hold meetings with the coalition of the willing for the next 3 years, then get a couple of legal opinions only to decide that Britain needs to give compensation of tens of billions of pounds to Maduro and the Venezuelan government, says Graham. Graham often has quite amusing messages that he sends in, and that has certainly tickled me today, although it's obviously a very, very serious situation. Ash in Slough says, with regard to Grace's point, the problem with grooming gangs is that the state overlooks them at all levels: councils, NHS, police, local government and MPs too, says Ash in Slough. Lots more to discuss, not least about Venezuela. We've got the former head of the army coming up, Colonel Richard Kemp, who'll give us his thoughts not just on Venezuela but also about the BBC apologising after their international editor Jeremy Bowen entered a 7th of October survivors' home without permission. They've now apologised for that and given them compensation, not coming out of Jeremy Bowen's inflated pay packet, I would guess. I think I'm on pretty solid ground with that. Lots to discuss between now and 12:30. Whatever is on the tip of your tongue, whatever you want to talk about, whatever you think we should be talking about, you give me a ring. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
Across the UK on on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you so much to everybody who has been in touch. There are lots of people that are getting in touch with voice notes as well. Polly has this one on Keir Starmer.
When you ask the question, Peter, what will Starmer do? He will do what he always does. He will side against anyone who is anti-British. He will try to be on the side of the people who would do us harm. We all know what this government is. Come on, let's face the music together, shall we? This is now 2026.
Well, thank you for that. It'll be very interesting to see what Starmer does. Certainly this press conference later on, when Donald Trump will be talking about this, we will see what he has to say. 18th Century Tory has been in touch on Twitter as well. It's always funny when Talk brings in one of their in-house military experts. I think perhaps talking about what Philip Ingram was saying a little bit earlier on. No matter what the subject is, they bring in Putin. Today, Peter Cardwell was talking about Nicaragua, and sure enough, Philip Ingram got Putin in. The unquestioning deference from presenters. It's not deference, it is simply, Philip knows his stuff. I don't agree with him on everything, but letting him speak and letting him put his point across. You disagree with it, 18th Century Tory, and that is absolutely fine, and we will make sure that we reflect all those opinions. Here's another one coming your way on Reform UK's prospects from Jack with this voice note.
Morning, Peter. Great show as normal. For all these people phoning in saying that basically Reform are a busted flush and their policies are all sort of just policies to grab attention, let's wait and see what happens in May. And then the next general election. The voters will decide what's right and what's wrong. And at the moment, the government we got and the previous government, etc., have been completely wrong. We will vote them out. You watch. Have a good day.
Thank you, Jack. I hope you have a good day too. Very interesting from the leader of Reform UK, of course, Nigel Farage, saying unorthodox and a breach of international law, in his opinion, certainly, in regard to what has happened in Venezuela. Very interesting one from Les here. He says, regarding Donald Trump and the President of the United States, Mr. President warned the Iranian regime about the nuclear development, warned about protecting the US borders, warned Hamas about hostages, warned Venezuela's president about drug cartels. He has now warned the Iranian terror regime. Thank you for your attention to these matters. Tell me which of these he hasn't followed up on. P.S. Great show. That is a very fair point. In fact, some of those points I'm going to put to Colonel Richard Kemp, who's the former head of the British Army here, we're going to speak to in just a second. In the meantime, let me play a couple more voice notes from Mark and Elisa. Mark first, please.
Morning, Peter. Mark in Lincolnshire. Yeah, regarding Farage and Reform, want to deport all, grooming gang people? Or no, life in prison, wasn't it? My point is, I don't want them having life in prison. I want them to have a normal sentence in prison, then I want them deported. I want their families deported. In many cases, quite a large chunk of their communities deported. I want benefits, entire benefits for anybody that's not native to be stripped. I want no social housing for these people. Trust me, they will self-deport. We'll save so much of our hassle. Anyway, cheers, Peter. Thanks.
Mark, thanks for your message. Let's hear from Elisa on Venezuela.
A very good morning to you, Peter. I have to say that watching the news about Venezuela this morning feels like watching an action movie. It seems unreal. And with everything that's going on in Iran, we mustn't forget that Maduro has been cozying up with Iran, apparently developing drones, as I understand it. I'm sure the IRGC will now be quaking in their boots because Trump has already threatened them. I feel like there's interesting and perhaps hopeful times ahead. We shall see.
Elisa, thank you for that. We're all reacting to the news this morning, really in the last few hours, of those military strikes by the United States against Venezuela, unorthodox and against international laws, what Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, has said. Let's find out what the former head of the UK Army, Colonel Richard Kemp, thinks. We'll do that in just a second here on Talk. You can get your voice notes, your calls, however you want to communicate with us in, of course, as he speaks, and we'll go to those before the end of the programme, 0344 499 1000 for calls, for voice notes, and indeed for WhatsApp text messages. Normal text messages 87222 with the word Talk in your text. Stay with us here on Talk.
Brand new for 2026. It's going to be the only way to start your day. It's the home of common sense. It's where the nation can come to speak about the day's news. It's the Jeremy Kyle Breakfast Show. You know who you are. You get up, you graft, you work hard. I'm here for you. We want to hear your side. Promise you one thing. It is where the nation can and will come to talk. The Jeremy Kyle Breakfast Show, weekdays from 6 a.m.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Now then, President Maduro has been captured by America. He is presumably on his way there to stand trial. There are conflicting reports, but certainly an American senator has said that he believes that President Maduro, the Venezuelan president, has been arrested along with his wife, brought to the United States, or at least on the way there. The Venezuelan defense minister has condemned the US's barbarity. We'll talk as well about the BBC, because they've apologised after Jeremy Bowen entered the 7th of October survivors' home without permission. No better person to get views on both of these issues than Colonel Richard Kemp, the former British Army commander. Richard, thank you for speaking to me on this. On Venezuela, Nigel Farage has called it unorthodox and probably against international law. Similarly, we've had various people saying militarily it was surgical and incredibly well done. I just wonder what your impression is from your perspective and someone who has huge experience of military matters.
I think it was an excellent operation from what we can see of the details so far, in which an international criminal, Maduro, was essentially arrested and taken, presumably, to the United States to be tried on drug charges. And it's been welcomed by, as far as I can make out, welcomed by the vast majority of Venezuelans. Let's not forget that Maduro should have stepped down after the elections in 2024, but he held on to power despite having lost a landslide to the opposition party. He stayed in power. He continued his criminal activities. He continued to repress, torture, imprison, ill-treat, and abuse his population, while at the same time maintaining this national drugs trade, which damaged the United States, the region, and the world, and at the same time allowed China, Russia, and Iran to establish bases inside his country working against the United States. So I think it was overdue. I think it was the right move to make, and I think it's been welcomed by most Venezuelans. Obviously, there'll be some who are in the pay of Maduro who won't welcome it, but I think the vast majority will, and hopefully we'll see a peaceful transition of power from the current regime to the elected government of Venezuela, which I imagine the Americans have helped to line up.
Does it matter that it may well be a breach of international law? I know you're not an international lawyer, but you have a heck of a lot more insight into what international law and how it's actually applied than the vast majority of people, Richard. We already have people talking about that, including actually, surprisingly, Nigel Farage. I just wonder what you think. Does it matter? Is it something that it's part of this, perhaps, but is it something that should concern us?
Well, I don't know if it is a breach of international law. I mean, it depends really on what went on behind the scenes to an extent. And if the elected government, which was never allowed to take power, came to an agreement with the Americans, in other words, the Venezuelan opposition, came to an agreement with the Americans and essentially sanctioned this operation against the president in power, illicitly in power, then I think that raises the question as to whether it is against international law or not. In a similar way to, if you accept, of course, that the opposition party in Venezuela is in fact the legitimate government. It's similar in a way to the Pakistani government inviting America in to attack Taliban and Al-Qaeda elements in the Pakistan border area. With their, people said that was against international, it wasn't, because it was requested and sanctioned by the Pakistan government.
What do you think all of this says about the international order and where we are, and indeed the actions of President Trump? We had someone contributing to our programme earlier, a viewer, who put a very good point across and said, actually, President Trump warns about things and then he does them. He warned Iran, he acted in Iran. He warned, for example, on domestic issues in regard to things like immigration, and then acted and came down very strongly on that. He warned Venezuela, he warned Maduro, and had a series of measures against him leading up to this. Can he at all be seen as a dovish president anymore? Because that's certainly how he would want to present himself to some degree. Or are we just so far into a new form of politics and more accurately and more precisely military order that actually these distinctions don't really matter anymore?
Yeah, I think you've got to look at the bigger picture. And the same was true in Nigeria on his pre-Christmas strike against terrorist Nigeria, which he gave warning to as well. And I think if the ultimate gain or benefit of this is to enhance US interests, enhance world peace, as I think occurred in Iran, and also to an extent not finished yet maybe in Nigeria, and probably in Venezuela as well, then I'd say that's pretty dovish. It may require muscle in order to get the doves tweeting or whatever doves do, but I think one shouldn't just look at it in direct terms. And I think one other important factor is that I mentioned earlier that Russia, China, Iran have got very strong interests in Venezuela to use for their own benefit, of course, for drugs and for gold, for getting Venezuelan gold, for breaking American sanctions, international sanctions, etc. And for working against the US. Those countries will take note of this. And of course, all of those countries are threatening international order and international peace at the moment. And if this serves as some kind of deterrent against them, then that's obviously got to be a good thing. And I think that the most immediate people that are going to take notice of this, I believe, are the Ayatollahs in Iran. Trump has threatened to support the protesters in Iran if they come under violent attack, if they get killed in perhaps large numbers. We don't know whether they would take that seriously or not, the Ayatollahs, but this probably will encourage them to take it more seriously than before. So I suspect they're now living in greater fear, and it might have an impact. It might have a beneficial impact on their reaction to the protesters.
Richard, I wonder if I can ask you about this story in regard to the BBC. I know you were tweeting about it last night. The BBC apologising after its international editor, Jeremy Bowen, entered on the 7th of October survivors' home after those dreadful, horrendous attacks by Hamas terrorists. I know you spent a lot of time in the region. I know you have spoken a lot to the IDF. You've been to Gaza in the last number of months, as so few people actually have. You've a perspective on it that many journalists certainly do not. I just wonder what you make of this row, because they've had an apology from the BBC, they've had £28,000 in compensation, but what a horrendous violation, especially after all they had been through.
I think it was absolutely disgraceful that Jeremy Bowen and the BBC, which is our national broadcaster, which we pay for with our licence fee, should essentially break into someone's house. Maybe not physically breaking, but unlawfully enter somebody's house and film there. Film photographs of the children that were on display in the house when the family and other family members, when the family themselves didn't know really that, and other people there didn't know the fate of these individuals. It was very soon after the 7th of October. So that sort of added insult to injury and is totally unacceptable. And I think it's quite right that compensation was paid to the family that was concerned, that owned the house. I think they should have got at least that and probably more, but it should have come out of Jeremy Bowen's pocket rather than my pocket and your pocket as BBC licence players. And it's not quite an example of BBC bias against Israel, which has been so dominant in the last 2 years and well before that as well. But it does show the way in which they, people like Jeremy Bowen and his masters in the BBC are willing to run roughshod over Jewish people in Israel to get their little news stories. So I think it's horrific. And actually, on that same subject of bias, I was just watching, I hate to say it, I was watching some BBC coverage of Venezuela just now. And a series of presenters were doing their utmost to try and get their guests, interview guests, to condemn Trump for what he did in Venezuela. Most of them were Venezuelan people, expatriates, and they lined up and stood behind what President Trump had done, which was clearly, they didn't say it, but very clearly was not the answer that the BBC wanted.
Well, we know, Richard, that Trump is always wrong and Israel's always wrong. Those two things are always the case. Actually, another BBC broadcaster, John Simpson, gave what I thought was a very wet lettuce kind of reply when people were asking about Iran and coverage of Iran. And he said, well, we don't have journalists in there and, it's very hard to cover and that's why we're covering it a bit less, or it's been more difficult, perhaps, to cover in the last few days. And, one of the great joys of the job I do is that so many people contact me about things all the time, viewers and listeners. You know very, very quickly whether people are annoyed with you or like what you're talking about or whatever. And a number of people said, Peter, you need to do more coverage in Iran, which we have been doing, including this morning. And I just wonder, given the huge coverage of Gaza, given the huge coverage that Hamas, did anything, said anything, and it was essentially treated as fact by many in the BBC and not nearly critically evaluated enough, particularly things like numbers of dead and so on. I just wonder whether you see this as a pattern in regard to maybe not just the BBC, maybe there are other organisations that do it too.
Well, there are many media organisations in the UK, excluding yourselves, of course, who and not just the UK, the US, elsewhere in Europe, who have an inbuilt anti-Israel bias. It's part of their agenda. They will, while John Simpson may say we don't have enough coverage on the ground in Iran to generate reliable news stories, well, they didn't have enough coverage on the ground in Gaza to do that either, but they still managed to flood their news channel with anti-Israel propaganda. Constantly, and numerous times have had to apologise for it. So yes, it's essentially they frequently just take up whatever propaganda Hamas, often under the guise of the Gaza medical authorities, churn out. They take it and run with it, and then they have to apologise, and they don't learn from that apology. And all the while, we're paying for it. I don't mind organisations like Sky News so much, who are also heavily biased against the BBC. I don't so much mind them doing that.
You think the problem extends to Sky News as well?
It certainly extends to Sky News, at least as much as the BBC.
Okay.
I don't watch either very much, but what I do watch and what I read about is extraordinarily biased against Israel. Like I said, I don't mind so much Sky News doing that because they're a commercial organisation, but I do mind the BBC doing it, who is supposed to be our national broadcaster, who we are forced to pay our licence fee for if we want to watch any television.
Richard, thank you. Always good to talk to you and get your perspective. That is the former commander of the British Army, Colonel Richard Kemp. What do you think of what he said? What do you make of his views? 0344 499 1000. Simon in Lancashire has been in touch and says Iran's Islamic regime will fall. These dictators always end up fleeing or being dragged out of a storm drain or a spider hole. Venezuela, big one as well. We don't usually cover just quite so many international stories here on Talk, it must be said. We've got Iran, we've got Venezuela and many, many others as well. There's so much to talk about, including with Ian from London, who's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Ian, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Good morning, Peter. I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about what's going on in Venezuela.
What do you think is going on? What are we not being told?
It's about the petrodollar. Now, without the petrodollar, the American economy will collapse. The dollar is worthless, thanks to a series of smooth brains, cretins, senile dementia sufferers since Nixon and Eisenhower.
Just tell us about petrodollars, because there'll be a lot of people watching and listening who don't really know what that is.
You cannot sell a barrel of oil without using the American dollar.
Mm-hmm.
It's as simple as that.
Yep.
This is why this ended Gaddafi, because he tried to, I think he used the euro. It's the only thing that keeps the American economy afloat. Now, I'm a supporter of Donald Trump, but I'm also a supporter of Nicolas Maduro. So it's a very sad day for me. And what is happening, that the American economy will only stay intact if the American dollar is used, because the country is bankrupt due to arms races by Reagan and smooth brain Bush and people like that. They bankrupted. Now, Donald knows this. He's not stupid. People paint him as an idiot, but he is not an idiot.
Okay.
And to save the country, he says you must use the dollar, because his first loyalty is to the American people.
Okay, Ian, thanks so much for your thoughts. We just have some breaking news here. I'm not trying to cut you off, and we do have to go to the news, but Pedro Sanchez, who's the Spanish Prime Minister, has issued a cautious statement about the US strikes in Venezuela. He says the government of Spain conducting a thorough monitoring of events. We call for de-escalation and responsibility. International law and the principles of the United Nations Charter must be respected. Sanchez has previously condemned unacceptable military operations carried out by the US on alleged drug trafficking boats linked to Venezuela. There's an awful lot happening. The opposition sources have said Maduro has been the capture was negotiated. I wonder who with. There's an awful lot about the opposition, and the opposition leader has said she's ready to take control in Venezuela. It's a really interesting dynamic situation, but we're actually going to return in a few minutes to the UK and talk about quite a number of stories, but a recruitment drive for magistrates. Maybe that's something you'd like to do. Reform UK also promising life sentences for grooming gang rapists and other child rapists as well. Lots to discuss here on Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. A big dramatic day on the world stage, Venezuela, where the president has been arrested and brought to America. We've had the former head of the army talking about how he thinks that is a good idea from Donald Trump and it will benefit the people of Venezuela. Nigel Farage, believe it or not, the leader of Reform UK, saying that he believes it's against international law and an unconventional approach. We know there are many unconventional approaches from Donald Trump. This is one of them. Let me know what you think about it. I'm here until 12:30. 0344 499 1000. We'd love to hear from you with a text or a voice note or even a call. You can ring me on 0344 499 1000. In a second, we're going to be talking about a recruitment drive for thousands of new magistrates. Would you like to be one of them? The Islamist killer who has won a human rights case because a prison left him depressed. There's a lot of detail around that. And Reform UK as well, promising whole life tariffs for child rapists. We've got a barrister and crime writer in the studio on that in just a second, so you can talk about that with us as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, send me a voice note, less than a minute please, and we'll get as many of those as we can on the air. You can also send me a WhatsApp text message or give me a ring, as I say, on the main number 0344 499 1000. So much to discuss in the next half an hour here on Talk. Stay with us. As I say, I'm here for the next half an hour today, but tomorrow it's between 10 and 1, and indeed all week I'm on drive between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the afternoons. Jeremy Kyle starting the new breakfast show on Monday morning at 6 o'clock, nowhere else you want to be, and Julie Hartley-Brewer back from her Christmas break. She will be here between 10 and 1 on Monday too. Right then, let's talk about what Reform UK are doing. They are promising life sentences, whole life tariffs in fact, so the rest of your natural life in prison for child rapists. The grooming gangs, rape gangs inquiry still to kick off. There's so much to talk about with this. I want to talk to Helen Fields now, who's in the studio with me, former barrister and crime writer. Great to have you with us, Helen. Will this work, do you think? Will this be, certainly it will keep people off the streets and away from children, this horrendous crime that they have been perpetrating. But will it act as a deterrent necessarily, do you think?
I think the deterrent issue is really difficult. So sexual assaults largely are impulsive or compulsive crimes. It's slightly different when we're looking at things like the grooming gangs, which is long-term coercive and planned behaviour, but a lot of rapes are impulsive and compulsive, which means that people quite often, even if they know there's a deterrent, the psychology of that doesn't really work. I think that it will make people think twice. Just the knowledge that it's going to be a whole life tariff, which, as you say, means they're never ever going to be coming out again, is, you know, I think it's a good thing. I don't have any objection to that, but we do need to make absolutely sure that we're not being in any way reactionary. So we need to make sure that there are strict guidelines and boundaries around that to make sure that, you know, kind of judges understand exactly what types of cases this should apply to.
There are sentencing guidelines already, and we had Bob in Cheltenham, one of our regular texters, get in touch earlier and say, actually, this is perhaps just about implementation of the guidelines that are already there. Obviously, there's not whole life tariffs that are there in those guidelines for child rape, but as someone who, on a previous occasion on this programme, has shared your own horrendous experience of being raped yourself, Helen, I just wonder whether you think that actually this is the right policy overall.
I think we do need to have another look at sentencing for those kind of offences. They should attract already incredibly long sentences. So the one big problem with offences like child rape and those kind of sexual offences is that it's incredibly difficult to say that anybody's ever been reformed. The sorts of people that can commit these offences, generally speaking, that's their stimulus, that's the thing that they cling to. And so whether you can ever say, oh, well, he's been in prison for 20 years, now he's reformed, now he's safe, that's something that I don't think you ever can say. So we definitely do need to look at not just sentencing, but whether or not there is ever safety in releasing those people. And I think that's where looking at whole life tariffs comes into it. But again, we have to be very, very careful, because at the moment a whole life tariff is for, you know, more than one murder, or murders with other, you know, other factors. And so we have to be really careful that we're looking at sentencing overall and not just promoting one kind of offence over the top of another, because it would be utterly bizarre if we had somebody kill a child and actually raping the child was a longer sentence. That doesn't mean to say that one is okay and one is less okay or not, you know, but we do have to be careful to look at sentencing overall and not just take a single offence on its own.
That's a very, very good point, actually. I just wonder, from your own perspective and in your own personal experience as well, do we understand this? Does the law get it? To rape, do the authorities get it? Because there's so many of our viewers and listeners really, really concerned about this issue, not just the rape gangs themselves, but rapists in general, domestic abusers, people who treat women and men as they should not, and whether the law actually deals with it properly.
Yeah, I think that the law, because this is relatively new law. I mean, we are talking about the 1980s when the law says you can't rape your wife. You know, so we're still learning and we're still adapting. Do I think it's taken seriously enough yet? No, honestly, I still don't. I think we've got quite a long way to go. And other countries, particularly the Scandinavian, the Nordic countries, treat this very differently. They talk about chemical castration. They look at other options.
And that was something that was talked about in this country for a while. What do you think of that?
Well, you know, there are other options here. So you can talk to people who've committed these offences and see if they will voluntarily agree to be chemically castrated, with a view to saying maybe something like, right, you're going to serve 10 years, then you've got the option of chemical castration. And does that address what I was talking about earlier with regard to, does that make people a little bit safer when you let them out of prison? So these things, in some ways, are compromises, but what we really need to do, of course, is both punish these offenders, but we also need to leave the population safer. And those kind of options, like the castration, are things that potentially do leave our children, our women, our potential victims, much safer.
Did you get a form of justice in your case?
I didn't get any justice at all. The person who raped me was a part-time police officer who knew me quite well. He was already in my life in a different format and waited to the day after my 16th birthday, which meant that he could always say it was consensual. And he literally, I can look back now and see it, but he was a part-time police officer. He knew perfectly well that it was going to be my word versus his. So, and these sorts of things go on. I talk about it now because I want my family, my children, my friends' children, to know what to look out for, but also, more importantly, to understand that if we talk about it, if we are unafraid, if women and men can just say, look, this happened to me, I'm not going to be made to feel ashamed, I'm not going to be silenced, it goes a long way to stopping future abusers. If they know that then they're not going to get away with it under a curtain of silence, then that's a good thing.
If you've been affected by any of the issues that Helen's talking about, you can go to talk.tv/helplines. There's a lot of advice there about different organisations that can help you. Helen, I just want to thank you for talking about that so honestly on the programme. There are a number of other issues around on this, on legal issues as well. One is about this recruitment drive for thousands of new magistrates. I do wonder, every barrister and solicitor I talk to, talking about the fabric, often quite literally, of courts not being there, you know, things like photocopiers not working, things like van drivers not being enough of them to bring the prisoners round to be tried. Will more magistrates actually help this, or could it actually be more difficult because they're not legally trained? They have recourse, of course, to legal advisors and so on, but is this actually going to help in some way? Because I do wonder, you know, David Lammy talking about jury trials, which we haven't even talked about either. I'd love your opinion on that as a way to kind of speed things up and to help the system. Just tell us your thoughts on all of this.
You know, it's not going to help. I mean, there is very little nuance here. So magistrates only sit for an average about 13 days a year. They're not legally trained, they're not legally qualified. They have one person with them who has some legal qualification. But I did plenty of cases in the magistrates' court. It's where most of the miscarriages of justice happen. So, for example, in recent times, the appeal rate was 40% successful, either on conviction or sentencing from the magistrates' court. And if you really think about that, if you've got 10 people lined up outside a magistrates' court to be dealt with, 4 of those are going to be wrongly treated under the law. That's a shocking statistic. But the point is that David Lammy can only really get away with that if he also withdraws the right of appeal from the magistrates' court to the Crown Court, which he's also talking about. But that's not going to work either. You're talking about sticking little plasters over the justice system. The entire problem with the system over years, the reason we've got a backlog is because we've got not enough judges, not enough sitting days, not enough barristers, not enough prosecutors. The court buildings are crumbling. None of the infrastructure.
It's the whole thing. It's the whole way
funded.
through, isn't it? It's the whole way through.
Yeah. And it's a bit like fixing a road system. You can fix it up to one roundabout and make everyone quicker to get there, but then the pile-up just happens a tiny bit further down the road. The only way out of this, and the only way to ensure justice, both for anyone within the system as a victim but also defendants, is to make sure it's properly funded. That's what they have to do. I understand that's not a vote winner. None of us want our money to go for that tax money. But honestly, it's the only way to fix it. And everything David Lammy is suggesting, actually, when you've worked in the system for a few years, you realise it's going to cause more problems, more delay, and ultimately more expense.
One big story that we've been talking about for the last couple of days on this station is the Islamist killer who won a human rights case because prison left him depressed. Now, certainly, this was about £250,000 of public money. He's been given £7,500 into his hand. That's been agreed by David Lammy, the Justice Secretary, as well. I think just a lot of our viewers and listeners will say, you know, the law is the law, but actually when you look at the European Convention on Human Rights, when you look at how this is used, and you look at someone who murdered 2 people, was put in prison and then held a prison officer hostage, was then put in isolation, which you would imagine would be a very straightforward thing. They're going to be prison governors now second-guessing themselves, looking at this case and saying, well, actually, hold on, if I do that, and the person claims that they are depressed, and he may well have been depressed, but his human rights, so many of our viewers and listeners think, and I think too, should not be seen as something arguably more important than others, especially that poor prison officer and the 2 people he murdered and their families.
Yeah, so there's a problem with what the Human Rights Court is dealing with here, which is that really originally it was designed to deal with really big cases. It was designed to look at the law of the countries that signed up to it and to deal with things that mattered and to make an impact. And it's devaluing itself. You shouldn't be hearing these kinds of cases. You know, that what there should be is an entry-level assessment as to whether or not this is something that that court should be dealing with at all. In this case, my opinion, but it is just my opinion, is clearly not. It trivialises the entirety of the system, and also it trivialises the effect that offending has on every other member of the community. We cannot and should not be prioritising convicted prisoners over the top of, you know, their victims and the people who work in that sphere. That doesn't mean to say that their human rights don't matter. They clearly shouldn't be taken into a prison and tortured or refused food, that sort of thing. But we do have to look really, really hard at just common sense. We've lost common sense a little bit in these cases, and it's way beyond time to bring it back.
Tell me, you're a crime writer now. You were a barrister. What's your latest novel? What's it about?
So the last one that came out is called Watching You. So I write a detective series set in Scotland and a different series about a profiler. So I kind of, you know, tick a few boxes. It's really good fun. It's been a lovely change from, you know, practicing law. But what's really nice is that it's still talking about current events. You're still talking about social issues. All the things that I used to deal with are still in there. But it's opened up a kind of whole new world to me, which is a little bit lighter, a little bit more fun, and slightly lower stakes. So it's really nice. But I enjoy writing. It's a slightly lonely thing, which is why it's lovely to come and do things like this and talk to people and get out in the real world. But yeah,
great stuff. That is Helen Fields, who's a former barrister, now a crime writer, and you can check out her books in your local bookshop or indeed on Amazon. Citizen or any other of those websites. Thanks for coming in, Helen. Great to talk to you. Always very interesting to talk to Helen. What do you think of what she said there? 0344 499 1000. We'll take your calls, text, tweets, voice notes between now and the end of the programme. There's so much to discuss today. Really big news day. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thanks to Jason in the Lake District, who says, what a fantastic guest Helen is. She should be advising the government. Instead, we have the mastermind failure. I mean, first of all, I totally agree with you. Helen's a fantastic guest and a fantastic thinker, and it's a privilege to interview her. She's brilliant. But yeah, you're right on David Lammy. And if you have time this afternoon, I would just implore you to go on YouTube and put in the words David Lammy Mastermind if you haven't seen it already. It's just so funny. He was just dreadful on Celebrity Mastermind. Tad has been in touch and says, I've often said the left are the real fascists, and the now toppled Venezuelan regime proves it. The news reported that Maduro heavily lost an election but stayed in place anyway in spite of the result. That's straight from the lefty playbook and has been repeated elsewhere for over a century. Check out one Keir Starmer and his reluctance to subject his party to the will of the people. Now come on, Tad, we had an election 18 months ago. I don't think we should have an election just because we don't like the government. Like, I disagree with an awful lot of things that Starmer does and says. I'm not going to defend them, but we can't just have an election every 5 minutes, and we do need to have some stability, even if it's things we don't agree with. The beauty of a democracy, unlike, of course, Venezuela, is that we can, there are peaceful transitions of power. In America as well, you have this wonderful thing about Western democracy where we say, right, we lost, fair and square, move on, which is why so many people need to learn the lessons of the Brexit referendum. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I voted Remain, my side lost, got over it in a couple of hours, moved on with my life and said, get Brexit done. The Cuban president, Miguel Diaz-Canel Bermudez, has posted on Twitter that his government denounces the strikes in Venezuela, calling them state terrorism, adding our zone of peace is being brutally assaulted by the US. Well, I'm not entirely sure what to think of all of that, but certainly Cuba, I don't think, can give anybody, least of all the United States, any lessons on how to deal with human rights. It's a dreadful regime that starves its people. It's an awful place. I've been there. It's a beautiful country, but the way that they treat people is dreadful, not just under the current Cuban president, but previous regimes, of course, Fidel Castro. I always felt mildly sorry, I must say, for the vice president of Cuba, who was, of course, Raul Castro, Fidel Castro's brother. He was the vice president of Cuba. He was deputy head of the army. He was this number 2 on the Cuban Communist Party. I mean, it can't always have been easy playing second Fidel. Thanks to everybody who's been in touch about magistrates as well. Leslie in Rugby says, in regard to new magistrates, they won't accept any right-wing people as the judiciary are left-wing now, says Leslie. Well, I'm sure there are a variety of opinions, but I know how it certainly comes across, certainly when we're talking about those stories about that Islamist killer, for example. John in Jersey says, if you're going to have whole life tariffs, full life sentences, why not have the death penalty for rape and sexual offences against children? John, I'm not for the death penalty. I just am not. It doesn't deter people. It just isn't an effective thing. It was there for hundreds of years. We got rid of it for a reason. We're a civilised country. We shouldn't use it. Lots of people will disagree with me. That's okay. That's fine. We disagree without being disagreeable. Dale has been in touch with a voice note on sentencing for rapists. This is what the Reform UK have been talking about. This is what Dale thinks.
Hi Peter, Dale from Stenning. Happy New Year, mate. Farage plans to hand out life sentences for grooming gang rapists. Brilliant idea. Do it. But it needs to be life means life. They can't get out for good behaviour on a life sentence like a lot of people do because good behaviour didn't get them in there in the first place. Life is life and there should be a whole life order. That's my opinion, especially for crimes against children, women and children. Life means life. Cheers, mate.
The proposal, certainly, Dale, is a whole life tariff, and that means what Rose West, Wayne Couzens, people like that are serving. There's only about 75 people in the UK who have whole life tariffs, and that is for the whole of your life, certainly. Thank you to Cliff in Berkshire. He says, sorry, but chemical or physical castration do not work. Rape is about power and control, and the drive is in the head, not in the trousers. Lots of other people getting in touch about that. I'm sorry I don't have time to read out all those messages. Just one final one from this person who says, another scandal from the BBC. It's this time it's Jeremy Bowen. How long should we put up with the biased BBC? I want to thank all of the people behind the glass, the top team who've put the show together today. Faith Eden has been the producer, Jodie McGowan set up the programme, Matt Thornton the technical operator, Tommy Bateson the assistant producer, Chris Jones and Luke Vincent have been the visual producers, Amin Asadi the video editor, Dean Spencer the weekend editor. So thank you to all of them. We will bring you the latest, of course, on Venezuela throughout our news bulletins, and indeed tomorrow I'm sure it will be coming up on my programme between 10 o'clock and 1 o'clock. I hope you can join me for that. In the meantime, have a lovely afternoon and thank you so much for your company here on Talk.